met a girl lost in a book, dreaming the past. Follow, she said, and jumped in a page. She smiled and she asked. Walked to Glenfinnan, waited with Charlie. We drank an old leaf, we were toasted by Robbie. We stood as they signed in our broth at the Abbey. She took me to places that I never thought you could see.
Alright, hi, and welcome to the third offering from Random Scottish History for Independence Live. Today we're going to talk Scotland's national animal, the unicorn. We're going to find out a wee bit more about it and its origins with regard to Scotland. We'll start with, what is a unicorn? Actually, it's a fairly divisive question. It depends who you ask, where, and when in time. People have had some very different ideas about what constitutes a unicorn in the past, and in the East they have a very different idea and mythos attached to the unicorns that they have. And I did say unicorns, they have more than one. Well, the Chinese writers enumerate 6 different sorts of unicorn: the king, the Qiu Tuan, the Po, the Hai Chai, the Tu John Chu, and the Eeles. The Eeles is their main archetypal unicorn, but it seems probable that all 6 are derived from a single original. The Eeles, moreover, does not show the tendency to sink down and fade away into the rhinoceros, which is so deplorable in the Western unicorn, for the Chinese know the rhinoceros perfectly well and describe it accurately as a totally different species. And that comes from a book called The Lore of the Unicorn by Odell. And we're going to be taking quite a number of excerpts from his book. He really goes into detail, though you'll also find out just how he managed to annoy me. So he says the third passage in Eeles about the unicorn is the most important. They say, he writes, that there are mountains in the interior regions of India which are inaccessible to men and therefore full of wild beasts. Among these is the unicorn, which they call the cartizon. This animal is as large as a full-grown horse, and it has a mane, tawny hair, feet like those of the elephant, and the tail of a goat. It is exceedingly swift of foot. Between its brows there stands a single black horn, not smooth, but with certain natural rings, and tapering to a very sharp point. Pliny the Elder, who existed between 23 and 79 CE, says the Orsain Indians hunt an exceedingly wild beast called the Monoceros, which has a stag's head, elephant's feet, and a boar's tail, the rest of its body being like that of a horse. It makes a deep lowing noise, and one black horn 2 cubits long projects from the middle of its forehead. Off the back of Pliny's writings, Julius Solinus, who's about 300-ish CE, has this description, and I'm not going to attempt the Latin. It was handily translated by Arthur Golding, who existed between 1536 and 1606. He says, "But the cruelest is the unicorn, a monster that belloweth horribly, bodied like a horse, footed like an elephant, tailed like a swine, and headed like a stag. His horn sticketh out of the midst of his forehead, of a wonderful brightness, about 4 foot long, so sharp that whatsoever he pusheth at, he striketh it through easily. He is never caught alive. Killed he may be, but taken he cannot be." The faithful, the religious and, by dint of religion, those who believed in unicorn, and we'll get into that, did not know what to think. And in default of a Thomas Aquinas, to resolve the apparent discrepancies between Aristotle and Physiologus, who was the author of a medieval bestiary, they tried to believe in a unicorn somewhat like a goat and somewhat like a horse at the same time. Early representations of the animal show cloven hooves on the 4 feet and solid hooves behind, or vice versa. They show a goat's beard on a horse's head, or even the body of a goat with the head of a horse. A more perfect example of the divided allegiance of the Renaissance could hardly be imagined. We're told how to capture a unicorn. Men lead a virgin to the place where he most resorts and leave her there alone. As soon as he sees this virgin, he runs and lays his head in her lap. She fondles him and he falls asleep. The hunters then approach and capture him and lead him to the palace of the king. The abbess Hildegard of Bingen had the belief in the power of the eye. Now, when the unicorn sees a bevy of such virgin damsels wandering about, gathering flowers or engaged in some other such maidenly pursuit, he stops at once in his tracks and eyes them. They eye him. Then he advances very slowly, crouches on his hind legs and looks at them for a long time from a distance. He is surprised at the fact that, although they have in general the appearance of human beings, yet they have no beards. He loves them because he sees, forsooth, that they are gentle and kind, and while he is gazing at them, all his wild and innocent heart drawn forth in adoration, the hunters steal up behind and slay him and cut off his horn, probably giving it to the king because these were items that were very associated with royalty. Instead of the proud beast of Cesius and Alain, fierce, shaped like an ass or horse, solid-hoofed, dangerous, indomitable, we have here an animal chiefly characterized by a propensity to fall asleep in virgins' laps. The only discernible likenesses are that in both legends the animal is said to be fierce and not to be taken by the ordinary arts of the hunter, and that the quarry in both belongs to the king. Julius Caesar tells us that in his time there was to be found in the Hercynian forest, where wonders have always abounded, a huge beast with the form of a stag, from the middle of whose brow between the ears there stood forth one horn, longer and straighter than the horns known to the Romans. The horn keeps getting longer as reports keep getting more contemporary. Really. Ctesias gives the length of the horn as 1 cubit or 18 inches, Alain as cubit and a half, Pliny as 2 cubits, Solinus and Isidore as 4 feet, Cardan is 3 cubits, Rabelais as 6 or 7 feet, and Albertus Magnus as 10 feet. At this point, the growth of the horn was checked, for the animal that bore it was obviously becoming top-heavy and needed, as several skeptics pointed out, to be as big as a ship merely to carry such a formidable bowsprit. Pliny, whom Rabelais follows in most other particulars, has made the horn only 3 feet in length. Commonly it dangles down like a turkey cock's comb, but when a unicorn has a mind to fight or put it to any other use, what does he do but make it stand, and then it is as straight as an arrow. So they're suggesting that the horn is floppy. This assertion is repeated in the Leith's Borough Pilot for June of 1890. The unicorn always resembles a horse or a donkey, and its horn is flexible. Curled up like an elephant's trunk when the creature is asleep or calm, stiffening to rigidity under excitement. It is not extravagant to suppose that the medieval draftsmen based their sketch of a beast with a spiral horn on the same legend, which is still current. We ought to add that Colonel Hamilton Smith observed the horn of some animal, perhaps in the British Museum. His memory was not quite clear on that point, as he admitted, which, from the narrowness of the base, the great length and weight, must evidently stand immovable on the nasal bones until excitement renders the muscular action more rigid and the coriaceous sole which sustains it more firm. Circumstances which may explain the repeated assertions of natives that the horn, or rather the agglutinated hair, which forms that instrument, is flexible. I'm not sure how much these descriptions really correlate with how we in Scotland view our national animal. These other descriptions seem to be of something completely different, really. Now, British children used to use a book, a publication called A Description of 300 Animals, which I obtained a more contemporary version of, an 1812 version of. But in the original, the description given for our national animal was the unicorn, A beast which, though doubted of by many writers, yet is by others thus described. He has but one horn, and that an exceeding rich one, growing out of his forehead. His head resembles an hart's, his feet an elephant's, his tail a boar's, and the rest of his body a horse's. His voice is like the lowing of an ox. His horn is as hard as iron and as rough as any file, twisted and curled like a flaming sword, very straight, sharp, and everywhere black, excepting the point. Great virtues are attributed to it in expelling of poison and curing of several diseases. He is not a beast of prey. In my updated version, we have something very different. They've obviously grown to understand that the unicorn is not an extant animal, not an animal that exists in the real world, and so is relegated to the fabulous animals section. It now gives us the unicorn. This is another offspring of the lively and fruitful fancy of man. Surely there is variety enough in the real works of nature. Why should we conceive monsters and hatch them out of our imagination? The word unicorn is found in the Psalms, and it is not certain what animal is meant by it, unless it is the rhinoceros. However, the animal now known by this appellation is a compound of the horse and antelope. The head and body belong to the equine species, but the hooves are those of a stag, and the horn, the tufts, and the tail are anomalies. This animal holds a high rank in heraldic lore and is one of the supporters of the royal arms. Let's have a wee look at his horn, being the most important part of the unicorn. We've had it described as being white, black, and red, a solid spear, but also possibly floppy, like a cockerel's comb. This last idea is actually maintained by a French consular agent who states that the unicorn is in possession of a single mobile horn capable of erection in the sense that it can receive from the will of the animal a variable position relative to the surface of the forehead, which I think if we saw that in a cartoon it would be as a point of humour. No one could take that seriously, I don't think. No matter where you go, though, the horn was said to be magical. It had medicinal properties. It was an antidote and a discoverer of poisons. To that end, they were said to have been made into cups for royalty, to have been dipped into the food and drink of royals. We'll go into that a wee bit. That was in order that they would avoid a horrible death by poisoning. The Musselburgh News for June of 1913 tells us, "The unicorn," said Mr. Frank Stevens in a lecture before the China Society on Mythical Monsters, "was an old conception as the type or myth of a noble hero. For centuries its horn was regarded as an infallible antidote against poison, and the food of the French kings and queens was touched with an object purporting to be a portion of the horn of the animal. Unicorns," added the lecturer, "were supposed never to make their appearance save in a well-governed country, and there was no tradition that they had ever been seen in England." And I'm not sure if the lecturer is having a little bit of a dig at England in that last sentence of his. Its worth is given in the Aberdeen Press and Journal for March of 1930. The unicorn's horn was an amulet, a talisman, a weapon, and a medicine chest all in one, and a single specimen was worth a city. Small wonder that, as the author of Lore of the Unicorn says, perfect specimens were to be seen only in the treasure chambers of popes and emperors and kings, or when some opulent church like St. Mark's of Venice did manage to acquire one, that it should be shown to the public only on gala days and beneath a pall of purple velvet. Photius, 810 to 893 CE, as per Ctesias, about 500 BCE, states, "There are in India certain wild asses, which are as large as horses and larger. Their bodies are white, their heads are dark red, and their eyes dark blue. They have a horn on the forehead, which is about 1.5 feet in length. The dust filed from this horn is administered in a potion as a protection against deadly drugs. The base of this horn, for some 2 hands' breadth above the brow, is pure white. The upper part is sharp and of a vivid crimson, and the remainder or the middle portion is black. Those who drank out of these horns made into drinking vessels are not subject, they say, to convulsions or to the holy disease, which was epilepsy. Indeed, they are immune even to poisons if, either before or after swallowing such, they drink wine, water, or anything else from these beakers. On page 20 of Shepherd's before-mentioned Lore of the Unicorn, he says, "It preserveth a man from the arrow that flieth by day, and the pestilence that walketh in darkness, from the craft of the poisoner, from epilepsy, and from several less dignified ills of the flesh, not to be named in so distinguished a connection. In short, it was an amulet, a talisman, a weapon, and a medicine chest all in one, for this is the horn of the unicorn." So unicorns would also dip their horns themselves into water where there was poison or impurities, and that would allow other animals to come and drink from that source, as well as the unicorn itself. So we're told in all the range of animal lore, there is no other story conceived so completely in the aristocratic spirit as that of the unicorn stepping down to the poisoned water while the other beasts wait patiently for his coming and making it safe for them by dipping his magic horn. James the First of Scotland speaks of the fair unicorn that voideth venom with his ever horn, which I take to be the loving unicorn that dissipates venom with his forever horn. The 17th century author Laurence Catalan submits, "No sensible man can fail to believe the marvels related of the unicorn's horn. That it sweats when standing near poison, he thinks, because of a desire to mingle with its like. And when taken as a drug, it overcomes and carries off such feebler poisons as arsenic and corrosive sublimate by virtue of its own more powerfully poisonous nature. Why it is that so deadly a substance as this does not kill the patient instantly, how it happens that it can be brought into contact with one's food and drink, or worn at one's neck as an amulet with impunity, Catalan and his fellows neglect to inform us." We find a traveller of the 19th century giving almost the same account of the water-purifying trait as that given by John of Hesse. Says he, "As I was sitting among the rocks with a party of natives, the conversation turned upon flags. A man sitting there said to a stranger, 'Why do the English put the Del Win,' that is the unicorn, 'on their flag?' and then related the whole story of it as one well known through the length and breadth of the land. The unicorn is found in a vast country south of Abyssinia. There the animals, undisturbed by man, live after their own laws. The water does not flow in rivers, but lives in the bosom of the soil. When the others wish to drink, the unicorn inserts his horn into the earth. With this he scoops a pool, satisfies his own thirst, and leaves what he does not require to the rest. So these English have the privilege of first discovering all things, and then the rest of the world may come after." There's no mention of the fact that the English only have the unicorn as an emblem at all by dint of the union with Scotland. In the Edinburgh Evening Courant for the 27th of July 1868, we're told both how unicorns are an unlikely animal within the animal kingdom, as well as the ideas given about its poison-detecting abilities. I may perhaps mention that such an animal is a physiological impossibility, and that the unicorn of the fables was a mere compound of an antelope, a horse, and a narwhal. The tusks or teeth of the narwhal were in former days exhibited as horns of the unicorn, and so precious were they that one of them was laid up in the Cathedral of St. Denis and two in the treasury of St. Mark's at Venice, all of which were exhibited in the year 1658 as veritable unicorn's horns. The physiological difficulty above mentioned seems to have troubled the minds of the old writers, who saw that an ivory horn had no business to grow upon the junction of the two bones of the skull, and yet felt themselves bound to acknowledge that such an animal did really exist. They therefore put themselves to vast trouble in accounting for such a phenomenon, and, in their determination to believe in the animal, invented theories nearly as wonderful as the existence of the unicorn itself. God hath given to horses and asses whole hooves, because there is the greatest use of their legs, but unto unicorns a whole and entire horn, that, as the ease of man is procured by the help of horses, so the health of them is procured by the horn of the unicorn. This last sentence refers to the then universal belief that the horn of the unicorn was a panacea for all illness, as we've seen, and an antidote to all poisons. It was thought to be so sensitive that if a poisoned cup were but brought near it, a thick moisture would exude from its surface, and if fragments were thrown into the cup, they would cause the liquid to swell and bubble, and at last to boil over. The physician Jordanus, in his book De Peste, speaks of seeing a Jewish man enclose a spider in a circle drawn on the floor with a unicorn's horn, and he says that the spider could not cross the line and starve to death inside it. We know that this test didn't work from a newspaper article given in the Northern Scot and Moray and Nairn Express for October 1888. They showed that that was a complete fallacy. Sir Kellam Digby, who was a great man in his day, read a paper before the Royal Society in which he declared that a horn in his possession, which he asserted was a unicorn's horn, would, if powdered and sprinkled in a circle round any venomous beast whatever, entirely prevent its escape, as the powder exercised a magical or paralysing effect on the creature. When the paper was concluded, the Secretary of the Royal Society was requested to produce a portion of this wonderful horn to powder, and the meeting was adjourned for the purpose of making ready for the experiment a large and venomous spider, especially procured for the occasion. Accordingly, on the appointed evening, the learned men assembled. A large quantity of Sir Kellam Digby's powdered unicorn's horn was formed into a circle on the table. Sir Kellam himself placed the spider very carefully in the middle, and great was the disappointment when, as the old chronicler of the proceedings of that early scientific meeting quaintly tells us, the spider did immediately walk therefrom. So there's a suggestion that even if those in authority didn't actually believe that a unicorn's horn could detect or dispel poison, that they were quite willing to spread the word about that it did and maintain that myth, that idea, to stop poisoners from even making the attempt. Why would you? If it was going to be discovered, or the horn was going to act as an antidote and it wouldn't work anyway, why would you even make the attempt? So I can see it as a good piece of propaganda. An inventory taken in 1497 of the possessions of James III of Scotland shows, in unicornis, the coins of that name, 904 item, a serpent tongue, and an unicorn horn set in gold. Item, a covering of variant purpur taster, browden with thressalis and a unicorn. That's saying that he has 980 gold unicorn coins of his own mint. He also has a serpent tongue and a unicorn horn in a gold base, and he also had a purple fabric which was embroidered with thistles and unicorns. The unicorn coins themselves, they were minted in about 1480 and were worth about 18 to 20 shillings each, so they were expensive coins. They were really only for those with money. But apparently they were not the first to have been minted. We're told that rabbinical tradition says that Joshua coined money, so that's about 1440 BCE, bearing the head of a unicorn. So he was, in effect, following a Jewish tradition there, I guess. Given by James VI to his queen was one little cup of unicorn's horn with a cover of gold set with 2 pointed diamonds and 3 pearls pendant, being in weight 7.5 ounces. So there's a lot of equipment we're seeing, a lot of items from the royal treasuries and the royal stores that are to do with unicorns, either being made in the shape of, or sporting the image of, or made from the unicorn's horns. There was a really interesting use that the unicorn was said to have made of his horn. So about 550 CE, Cosmas writes, When the unicorn finds himself pursued by many hunters and about to be taken, he springs to the top of some precipice and throws himself over it. And in the descent he turns a somersault so that the horn sustains all the shock of his fall and he escapes unhurt. Again, that just lends itself to some humorous cartoon scenario in my head. Apparently some myths had unicorns having carbuncles, which is an old word for rubies, in the base of their horns. There's a poem, "We caught the beast called Unicorn that knows and loves a maiden best and falls asleep upon her breast. We took from underneath his horn the splendid male carbuncle stone sparkling against the white skull bone." It's a bit morbid, but apparently they contained rubies, so that made them more valuable to seek out, I guess. So in some places unicorn horns were carved, maybe to make them more interesting, more of an ornament, maybe for sale. But this lent itself to certain ideas of them. So Arabian notions of the inside of the unicorn's horn are highly interesting. Ibn Khordadbeh asserts that when the horn is split longitudinally, one finds inside of it, on a black background, the white figures of a man, a fish, and a peacock or some other bird. Al-Damiri affirms in more detail that when one cuts the unicorn horn lengthwise, there are found in it various figures in white on black, as of peacocks, goats, birds, certain kinds of trees, men, and other things wonderfully depicted. There were some educated people who knew the items that were purported to be unicorns' horns weren't what they were claimed to be. Professor Wurm, he was 1588 to 1654, began with a careful description of the unicorn horns, to be seen in his time all over Europe, everywhere regarded and highly treasured as horns of unicorns. So far are they from being such, he then says, that they are not horns at all. They have neither the substance nor the shape of horns, and they are not set in the animal's cranium as horns are. He asserts that they have all the characteristics of teeth, and that teeth they must be called. In his third section, Ole Wurm declares that the unicorn horns of Europe are the teeth of narwhals, citing as evidence the cranium of a narwhal, which he had recently examined. He concludes by saying that in the future, those who do not care to deny the authority of witnesses, and even of their own senses, will be obliged to admit that the unicorn horn is really the tooth of the narwhal. But the tusk was to be used in the royal household of France for 150 years after Ole Wurm's dissertation was delivered and printed. It was to be kept in the official pharmacopoeia of London for more than a century to come. Good physicians continued for a long time to speak highly of its medicinal virtues. Ignorance and mental indolence, better known as conservatism, may have been chiefly responsible for this, but they were assisted by these two facts. The disclosure of the marine origin of most unicorn horns did not, by any means, disprove the existence of the terrestrial unicorn. On the contrary, if there was a unicorn of the sea, it seemed to follow necessarily that there was one of the land as well. It could also have been that they wanted to continue the idea and the propaganda of the horns working against poison. Our Western ideas of the unicorn mainly stem from religion, obviously, specifically Christianity, but the unicorn itself and the myth of it appears to have its basis in the far older religion of Zoroastrianism. So we'll discuss unicorns and religion. So from the Dundee Evening Telegraph from May of 1902, it tells us there was a time not so long ago when the existence of the unicorn was as implicitly believed in as the camel or any other animal not seen in these latitudes. And the translators of the Bible set their seal upon the legend by translating the Hebrew word re'im, which probably meant a rhinoceros, as unicorn. Thus the worthy Thomas Fuller, 1608 to 1661, came to consider the existence of the unicorn clearly proved by the mention of it in Scripture. And that was the same for so many people. When he strayed into Physiologus, the unicorn entered a region not worthy of him. a creature imagined nobly as terrible, solitary, with a beauty of power, was transformed under Christian influence into a little goat-like animal, eating out of the hand, going to sleep in maidens' laps, and serving as a symbol of virginity. Nietzsche could not have asked for a more brilliant illustration of slave morality. The Edinburgh Evening Courant for July of 1868 goes into the apparent mistranslation of the Hebrew Bible, which has lent itself to this unicorn myth. The Bible, as Mr. Wood, the author of the work before us, says, is rich in allusions to animal life, but without an acquaintance with these animals, most of the passages in which their names occur are but imperfectly understood. The Septuagint translates reim by the word Monoceros, or the one-horned, which has been transferred to the Vulgate by the term unicornus, a word having the same signification. In an age when scientific investigation was utterly neglected, such a translation would readily be accepted without cavil. On turning to the Jewish Bible, we find that the word reim is translated as buffalo, and there is no doubt that this rendering is nearly the correct one, and at the present day naturalists are nearly all agreed that the reim of the Old Testament must have been the now extinct urus. A smaller animal, the bonasus or bison, also existed in Palestine, and even to the present day continues to maintain itself in one or two spots, though it will probably be soon as completely erased from the surface of the earth as its gigantic congener. That the reim was one of the two animals is certain, and that it was the larger is nearly as certain. The reason for deciding upon the urus is that its horns were of great size and strength, and therefore agree with the description of the reim, whereas those of the bonasus, although powerful, are short and not conspicuous enough to deserve the notice which is taken of them by the sacred writers. However, this assertion obviously came up against criticism from varying quarters. Himilius has heard of the infidels who doubt the unicorn, and he wishes them to know that if this animal were really fabulous, it would not be mentioned in so many places of the Holy Scripture. Like a true fundamentalist, he will not allow that the unicorn or any other animal or thing mentioned in the Bible was intended as a symbol. In the King James Version of the Bible, there are 7 clear references to the unicorn, all of which occur in the Old Testament. The animal is mentioned twice in the Pentateuch, once in Job, once in Isaiah, and 3 times in the Psalms. The religious were prepared to believe if it was written in the Bible, then it was the word of God. We're told if Martin Luther wrote the word einhorn in translating Deuteronomy 33 verse 17, that was equivalent to divine assurance that the unicorn exists, and any doubt on that point might open the way to infidelity, as the crevice in a Dutch dike may let in all the sea. If the people who believed this had been considerably cruder and more bigoted than they were, and if they had had the power, they might have enacted unicorn laws, controlling public education like the so-called monkey laws of certain American states, for the controversy was in fact a tiny model of the great quarrel over Darwinian theory. However trifling the issue may seem in comparison, a real conflict was involved between biblical authority and experience or observation, and this is precisely the conflict that has been going on since the appearance of The Origin of Species and The Descent of Man. And it has its roots far before Christianity, but the Christians really adopted it after the translations of their Bibles. Solinus, in Arthur Golding's translation, as mentioned previously, he calls the Monoceros a monster, which is an epithet vehemently exclaimed against by the pious of later ages, who considered it both sacrilegious and bad zoology to call any beast monstrous that was mentioned in the Bible. One might almost say that the cause of fundamentalism was lost when the unicorn vouched for by Scripture was abandoned. For if we cannot trust the translations of the Bible as equally authentic with the original Hebrew, which few fundamentalists take the trouble to learn, then the door is thrown open to lower and higher criticism, to allegorical interpretations, to scholarship, to facts, to thinking, and, in short, to infidelity. Even the water purification mythos of the animal is given a Christian colouring in the Greek bestiary, which says that when the animals assemble at evening beside the great water to drink, they find that a serpent has left its venom floating on the surface, a characteristic trick of serpents which is elsewhere vouched for. They see or smell this venom and dare not drink, but wait for the unicorn. At last he comes, steps into the water, makes the sign of the cross over it with his horn, and thereby renders the poison harmless. The Banffshire Journal and General Advertiser for June of 1861 relates that the lion and the unicorn, or their prototypes, may be seen crouching in peace at the feet of the Buddha as he sits on his marble throne at the entrance of the vast rock temples of Ajanta. The creature we vulgarly call a unicorn is more naturally portrayed there, for the people who chiselled out that cavernous cathedral knew its nature better than to present but one horn, though they well knew, as we know from Assyrian monuments, that it was often conventionally so represented. The Chinese Eeles has Buddhist-inspired attributes. Unlike the Western unicorn, the Eeles has never had commercial value. No drug is made of any part of its body. He exists for his own sake, and not for the medication, enrichment, entertainment, or even edification of mankind. Both in the East and in the West, the unicorn comes to typify a messiah. Shall we call this an accident, or shall we attribute it to the infiltration of Christian influence? A third possibility is that the two legends came to a similar fruition because they sprang from a single root. It may appear that from the very beginning the unicorn has been conceived as beneficent, holy, in some sense divine, always striving for the healing of nations. As mentioned previously, Persian Zoroastrianism seems to have had a hand in originating the unicorn myth. The basic idea of Zoroastrian religion is an intensely conceived dualism, worked out in the moral sphere as a perpetual conflict between good and evil, captained respectively by the primal gods Ormusd and Ahriman. We worship the good mind and the spirits of the saints and that sacred beast, the unicorn, which stands in Vorukasha, and we sacrifice to that sea of Vorukasha where he stands. John of Hesse even speaks of Animalia bona and Animalia venenosa, exactly as though he were a Zoroastrian worshipper of Ormusd instead of a Christian priest, and it would be hard to find a stranger tangle of cultures and beliefs than his Christian use of an ancient Persian symbol to illustrate and enforce a Hebrew tale. This is furthered when we're told that the race of goats is divided into 5 orders, of which sheep-goats form the second, and that these are subdivided into 5 kinds, the second of which is the Koresk, which has one great horn and dwells upon separate hills and takes its pleasure there. We also know that the Koresk is of the fold of Ormusd, because it is said in the same passage that he educated one of the Zend kings. This helps to explain the fact that several of the one-horned animals represented at Persepolis have cloven hooves and look far more like goats than either the bull or the ass. From the time of Aristotle to that of the British College of Heralds, scholars have been perplexed by the unicorn's combination of caprine with equine characteristics. The unicorn of Albrecht Dürer, for example, is a horse in most respects, but it has cloven hooves and a goat's beard, and so has the unicorn of the British Royal Arms. This confusion, preserved by a surprising tenacity of tradition, may have been due originally to the effort of Zoroastrian artists to represent not any single species of animal, but a combination of several species which they regarded as the leaders of the pure creation. The Scotsman for August of 1932, in discussing the varying images extant within Rothsy Chapel, gives us the lion and the unicorn. One pillar shows the lion and unicorn in combat. Both are favourite shapes in ecclesiastical symbolism. The lion was a symbol of the resurrection of Christ, as seen at St. Lawrence in Nuremberg and in the choir at Augsburg and numerous other places. The unicorn typifies the Saviour's incarnation, but, like his adversary, he has a twofold significance, and here he may stand for Satan, as his broken chain seems to show. It was not until late in James III's reign that the unicorns on the Scottish arms were depicted as chained, and it may be that this sculpture synchronises with the custom, but surely it is far-seeing to attribute a diabolical origin to a national emblem. The origin of the unicorn as a supporter of the tree of life is as old as Sumeria. So this brings us to the unicorn as it appears in heraldry, and the crux of our investigation. Why did Scotland adopt the unicorn as a supporter of its royal coat of arms? I'm going to address an elephant in the room, which some may already know is coming. So in Shepherd's lore of the unicorn, which has given us so much of the information related so far, he annoyed me with his constant Anglo-centricity, the whole England English for Britain British thing, especially as it was written by an American from Illinois. But we will begin here with a note. He writes, "Admirable examples of the Scottish unicorn are given on the title page of the edition of Hector Boethius published at Paris. Many characteristics of the English, he means British, unicorn, the crown on the neck, for example, and the chain, are to be seen in the coins called unicorns struck for James III of Scotland about 1480. But there the animal is sagiant or sitting upright. There is dispute regarding the origin of the Scottish unicorn, but apparently it came from the arms of the Dukes of Somerset and entered Scotland when Jane, or Joan Beaufort of that house, married James I, the poet king. If this is true, the English, he means British, unicorn originated in England. At the time of the union of the crowns in 1603, a royal crown was added to the unicorn, but this was removed after the accession of the Hanoverians. The unicorn has always had the sinister or left-hand position in England, but Scotland proudly kept it dexter or right hand until 1766, and for a long time refused to remove the crown. In 1853, Scotland petitioned for the retention of the crown. The petition failed. I was not prepared to believe that the origin of Scotland's unicorn was to be English. And this assertion was apparently borne out from my researches of the arms of the Beauforts or Dukes of Somerset, where I was unable to find one single unicorn. Not one. Not within the arms, not within their supporters. What they did have were lions, rather angry-looking two-horned goats, and in some cases a dragon, showing a kind of link to Wales in some cases. So I appealed to the Lion Court of Scotland. No greater authority on Scottish heraldry. I was interested to see what he might have to say. I wrote, "Might I query the assertion stated here as to the Scottish unicorn having originated with the Dukes of Somerset, in particular Jane Beaufort, please? I can find no unicorns within their heraldry. Thank you for your time." To which they very kindly returned an answer, which was, "I think this is broadly correct. 2 years after James I's wedding to Joan Beaufort and his release from captivity, the unicorn Pursuivant is first recorded, and we see unicorns supporting the royal arms of the Queen in this damaged seal impression from a document dated 1439. Which wasn't exactly the answer I was hoping for, and so I responded, if the unicorn is first recorded as a supporter of her arms in 1439, could this not be due to her connection with Lorne in Scotland generally? Might she have adopted it due to her spouses? I've seen lions, dragons and goats for the Beauforts of Somerset, but no hint of a unicorn." I am not enough of an authority on the matter to be able to debate as succinctly as I might want to with the authority on Scottish heraldry, but it makes sense to me that if James I had already decided on the unicorn as a supporter of Scottish arms, even though it wasn't yet official, that after her marriage to him she would be aware of this, thereby adding the unicorn to her arms, in the same way as former family members had done with the dragon, to make a link with Wales. She was showing her link with Scotland in this regard. In 1439, 2 years after the death of James, Joan marries the Black Knight of Lorne, thereby maintaining her Scottish connection and also thereby retaining her unicorn supporter to her coat of arms. Now, what I am prepared to outright refute after hours of searching through the arms of the Somerset Beauforts is that it did not originate from the arms of the Dukes of Somerset. They do not have unicorns as part of their arms, nor as supporters of their arms. That claim is wrong. A future King of Scots was going to have the means, even in captivity where by all accounts he was treated respectfully, to obtain literature and publications that dealt even in part with the subject of this fabulous Christian unicorn. We've already seen how much of it was out there being read and regurgitated by academics throughout the countries of the world for centuries, prior to James I being even a glint in his father's ee. I read a cute wee tradition as well regarding James and Joan meeting when James saw her patting or attending to a unicorn, and knowing that unicorns were attracted to purity, he knew that he was on to a winner with this woman, so he courted and married her. And due to this being how they'd met, he has then gone ahead and adopted the unicorn as his national animal and supporter of his arms. Even in this obviously fictional account of the meeting of James and Joan, it's stated that he already knew what a unicorn was. He already knew the nature of the unicorn to know that it was attracted to purity. It may all be a moot point, however, as in the Rothsy Chronicle for October of 1876, we're given a description of Rothsy Castle. For just now, we're just going to take a couple of sentences from the description. It originally consisted of a circular court about 140 feet in diameter, surrounded by a wall 9 feet in thickness and 17 feet high, afterwards raised 9 feet higher with battlements, 4 round towers upon the flanks at nearly equal distances, and an erection which is ascribed to King Robert II, and which projects on the north-east side between 2 of the towers. The principal gate was at the north end, having the royal arms placed over it, cut in stone, and was approached by a drawbridge. Now, the royal arms mentioned here are not described, but if you have a look at them, they look to be clearly supported by a unicorn on either side. But are they dated from Robert II, which is 1316 to 90? It was noted in Robert Brown's 1881 publication, The Unicorn, A Mythological Investigation, where a portion of a letter from Thomas Dixon, Esquire, dated the 1st of July 1880, is reproduced. It reads, "The earliest extant example of the unicorn as a supporter in the royal arms of Scotland appears to be that which occurs in the royal achievement carved above the gateway of Rothsy Castle. The Lion King of Arms, who examined it carefully last summer, told me that this carving appeared to him to be contemporaneous with the part of the building in which it is inserted, which, considering the style of the architecture and various entries in the Exchequer rolls relative to the building of Rothsy Castle, he was disposed to assign to the time of Robert II or III. It actually turns out that the Scotsman ran an article almost exactly a year ago in which it states, in the coat of arms approved by Robert III, 1337 to 1406, 2 unicorns supported a shield, with the oldest surviving example of this heraldry found above the gateway of Rothsy Castle. Meaning the latest they could have been there would have been 20 years prior to James and Joan, thereby destroying that origin completely. Again, I believe the Scottish nobility would already have been well aware of the existence of unicorns and their symbology for a long time prior to 1426. Robert I, in 1274 to 1329, was super religious, as evinced by his impassioned plea to Pope John XXII in the form of the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, pleading Scotland's case as a Christian nation, over which England had no right or claim. And with religion came a belief in unicorns, as we've seen. Scotland's national animal became the supporter of the British Royal Coat of Arms in 1603. There's also the famous poem of the pair as related in the Southern Reporter for October 1921. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all round the town. Some gave them white bread and some gave them brown. Some gave them plum cake and sent them out of town. Shepherd mentions the debate over the retention of the unicorn's crown, and there are numerous newspaper articles devoted to this subject from 1853 onwards. The most interesting I found was an open letter penned by then Lion King of Arms David Lindsay, published in the Paisley Herald and Renfrewshire Advertiser for the 10th of December 1853. As a consummation of this assumed imperial dominancy, our poor old unicorn was shorn of its crown and thereby deprived of its imperial character. Suppose that I am told by an English authority that the imperial crown is not significant of royalty, but that it is the rank of the wearer alone which confers such high distinction. If this is consistent with English heraldic usage or law, then why retain the crown upon the lion? Such doctrine, however, is not admitted or understood so far as I know among Scottish heralds. Now, let me ask if justice was then done to Scotland, the free, united, but not merged kingdom. Again, in regard to the unicorn, I may be told that it was not crowned before the time of James VI, but look before that period. You will find the crown displayed by way of surtout on the Scottish national banners, and from thence it appears to have been transferred to the heads of the unicorn and lion for the first time, upon England falling under the dominion of a Scottish king. This mark of royal dignity, having remained for subsequent reigns, might justly have been continued after the Union, without incongruity or inconvenience. I am afraid to trespass on your limits, but there is one thing I am anxious to know. Whether the words Scotland and England and the crosses of St Andrew and St George appear to be so embodied in the English copy of the Articles of Union deposited in London. If so, they would strengthen our Scottish claim to precedency in the entire arms of Great Britain. On the other hand, if they are there transposed to England and Scotland, and the crosses of St George and St Andrew, then we can only arrive at one conclusion, that it was and still is the intent and meaning of the treaty that within Scotland the Scottish insignia shall have precedence, and within England the English shall have precedence, to every article, building, banner, standard, and tabard whereon those united arms appear. We demand that our national supporter, the unicorn, be again crowned and gorged with an open crown. Its restoration would be but an act of justice, which is in accordance with our national honour and the strictest heraldry. But if this royal distinction is still withheld from the unicorn, why retain the crown on the head of the English lion? The English heralds have robbed us of what our kings gave us, and what our lion court had neither the sense nor the courage to defend, but Her Majesty the Queen can restore both crown and banner, and they shall be restored, if there is yet spirit in the Scottish people. We do not care a straw for the secret and illegal act of the English Privy Council, which was passed before the Union. Neither do we care for the sophistry of the Scotsman or the quack antiquarianism of the current. The cause of Scotland shall flourish in spite of all opposition, for hers is the good cause, on whose side are justice, right, and truth. I remain, sir, yours, etc., David Lindsay of the Mount, Lion King of Arms. Dated Cooper Fife, 2nd of December, 1853. P.S. In Westminster Abbey, upon the tomb of Mary Queen of Scots, the imperial arms of Scotland take entire precedence of, and are paramount to those of England, as any man may see. From what I could see in the government records, it is worded the opposite way in England with regards to the English copy of the Treaty of Union. It is England and Scotland rather than how it is in Scotland, Scotland and England. Scotland isn't the only country to have a fantastic animal as its national animal, not even within small list of British countries, Wales have the equally fabulous dragon, as does Bhutan in the form of the druk, and the Greeks have the wonderfully symbolic phoenix as their national animal. There's definitely still a cloud over the specific origin and entry of unicorn into Scots symbology as supporters of the arms. If it originated with Robert II or III, where did they get it from? Was there perhaps something prior to that? I mean, prior to that you had the wars with Edward I, the Wars of Independence, where Edward took a lot of documentation, etc., out of Scotland. So perhaps there was something within these documentations that lent itself to an earlier adoption of the unicorn by Scotland. I feel that it was an easy animal to adopt by Scotland, being as it was an animal that traditionally would rather die than be captured, which was a feeling emulated by a lot of Scots as they defended their country from continuous incursions from the south. So I can see why it would have been adopted. It's the when that's the real question that's eluding us for now. So we'll finish with a poem from the Scotsman of April 1936. There's always a poem attached to these episodes somewhere. It's entitled The Unicorn and is by Lewis Spence. On the Scots blazon ramps the unicorn, chained is he for that so wild and wood. Men gnaw him that he's horror of his horn, yet kind is he to them of Scottish blood. Of Alder rivers did him wraithly breed, now doth he sort with kelpies and with geests, yet is he aye the symbol of our seed. Soothly is the unicorn the roy of all beasts. Herald nor pursuivant nor trumpeter looks upon him without meikle awe. To Scotland's fays he is of grit dolour, what he amang the banners rakes on raw, his milky hide proclaims his purity. On honour and on glory his hoofs rests, of knights and campions approved is he. Soothly is the unicorn the roy of all beasts. Men tell that in the deserts, Perth and in, he hants the gowden the racksters of the sand, yet in our region is he ill to find, as though he did not love this farach land. But this is Fawcett, when the moon she blaws out of the sails of Shada, and she keasts her leaves on muckness, then he stakes the shaws. Soothly is the unicorn the roy of all beasts. Nor shall the unicorn our symbol be, on ilka heart that his old Scotland's make, stamp it as on a gowden piece is he, and men shall love him for his honour's sake. O Caledonia, louse thy hornet horse, whilk thy defence bears on his siller crease, that end it be this nation's remorse. Soothly is the unicorn the roy of all beasts. I'm also going to end with a quote that I found hilarious, and it's with regards to people's belief in unicorns. To anyone not instructed in comparative anatomy, the unicorn is so credible a beast that it is difficult to understand why anyone should ever have doubted him. Compared with him, the giraffe is highly improbable, the armadillo and anteater are unbelievable, and the hippopotamus is a nightmare. So we may see you for the next. Take care.